Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for your answers and testimony today. Secretary Barnes, I want to try and go back over the defined benefit versus defined contribution. Thankfully, Representative Wilms plowed most of the ground on where I was going to go. But I want to understand, in your testimony, as I understood it, your rationale for not going to a defined contribution plan and remaining in a defined benefit plan for our state employees is because it doesn't solve the current problem. And I will note of the liability that we have coming up in the cliff here another 10 years or so, and the amount of money we have to put into that plan. I will note that nobody has talked about changing the current employees' retirement plan, the contracts that we have awarded, the retirees that are currently in retirement, and changing the plan. So in your response, the assumption would be we're not doing that. This would be all prospective employees, and note that. And then I would also look at, if you do not believe a defined contribution is the way to go, is that based on the best interest of our customer, which is the taxpayer? I did note that in your testimony you said that it was best for our employees, but is that the best option for our customer, which is the taxpayer? And if so, what objective evidence do you have for that?
Well, yes, I do believe that it is in the best interest of our customers. I mean, first of all, we are a service providing entity, and we provide more services than you can imagine, and we do that largely by employing people, or significantly by employing people to provide those services. So to some degree, our ability to attract and retain the best employees to meet those needs is one of the things that we need to do in order to serve taxpayers and residents of the state. So I think that that we have common purpose. I don't want to think that if it's on behalf of the taxpayer, then it harms employees, or if it's good for employees and harms taxpayers. We should have, we need to pay our employees in order to help our taxpayers and residents. In terms of the objective benefits, I mean, they're clearly, we could project forward if we have a defined contribution plan where we have to pay, say, 5% of payroll as an employer match, and that the employees match some amount to that. You can make projections about what kind of retirement that would provide for folks, or what that will cost us. One thing I know for sure is, were we to have a plan like that, we would be paying 5% of our payroll into defined contribution plans every year forever. If you have a commitment to do that, or forever, as long as that plan was in effect, we know that the contribution would be 5% of payroll. Right now, our normal cost, so if we didn't have any unfunded liability, our normal cost in our state plan is whatever, $280 million. That is the equivalent of about 5 or 6% of payroll. And a lot of that number is going to go down. The normal cost as a percent of payroll is declining as the more expensive older tiers retire, and the newer employees are hired into a lower cost tier. So I believe in the long run, we will be, our normal cost of our pension will be in the order of magnitude of 4 or 5%, and that will be sustainable over time. Now, will we sometimes have to make up for investment losses? Yes, but there are other times when investment losses will be wind at our backs. As the finance director in the city of Stamford for a number of years, we operated our own defined benefit plans. There were several years in which the plan had done extraordinarily well, and we were well funded. We had a funded ratio of 120%. At 120%, investment returns make it possible for the employer not to make any contribution at all. Or somewhere around there, depending on exactly how the plan is structured. So as you end up with strong performance that's better than expected, particularly if you can be very realistic about your investment returns, you can produce a plan that, yes, sometimes you have to make up for for bad years in the market, but you also get the benefit of good years in the market, and you can take advantage of that by by either using those extra resources to fund other liabilities or cut taxes or increase spending or whatever it is you want to do with it as a legislature. But there really are opportunities where the beauty of investing those funds directly as the employer works to your benefit. And I really do think that the loss, the economic loss of paying for the management of retirement accounts on an individual by individual basis is extraordinarily devastating. I mean, if you look at the impact of a percent of your return being paid to an investment advisor over the course of a work career, it's extraordinarily how important that is to the quality of those retirement savings. So having a highly efficient, centralized investment operation is very valuable. I appreciate that there are lots of folks who disagree with me, and I think that there are strong arguments for a defined contribution plan. I'm not going to, I don't dismiss them. I just have put a lot of thought into it, and ultimately I fall on the side of defined benefit plan being best. The last argument that I would use is were you to switch to a defined contribution plan, you would create a closed defined benefit plan, which is a plan in which nobody's making you don't have employees making new contributions. Closed plans are extraordinarily hard to manage. As you suffer market losses in a closed plan, you have to make up for them in a very short period of time. You look at what's happened in, the city of Bridgeport is a classic example. They have a closed firefighter plan, which now is an enormous budgetary burden to them as they get close to as the number of actives has dwindled to essentially zero. I think they may not have any active employees any longer, very few. Everybody in the plan is retired. All those funds need to be made up for on an annual basis, and it creates an enormous drag. Whereas in an active plan, you are given you have plenty of time to correct funding problems that have developed over time, which is, I think, something that we should be mindful of. It took us years to get into this situation. We can set up a plan to get out of it over a similar period of time, and that because of the way the plan works, that will work out just fine for us. We'll be able to do it over a long period of time in a way that we can afford, and frankly, I think in the long run is more cost effective. But I'm happy to talk more about it offline if you'd like.
I thank you for that perspective on that. And I would argue that you must know something that the private sector does not, because if it was more cost effective to defined benefit plan, I guarantee the private sector would have gone back to them, even though the 401ks were authorized approximately 30 years ago. And to Representative Wilms' point, my own town did the same thing in negotiation. They went to defined contribution for all future employees, and we also saw a tremendous benefit. And I think that is the trend. And I think the only place that you find these types of plans anymore is where the ultimate customer is not even at the negotiating table. I would argue that the taxpayer fundamentally is not at the negotiating table when these contracts are defined and when the benefits are negotiated. And that they end up, if we negotiate a bad deal or a deal that costs more, they end up paying the bill, but they never really had a say at the table to say whether they wanted it or not. So I think that's one of the things. I think the other thing that you dismiss or minimize is the risk associated with a defined benefit plan. You've mentioned several times the market risk, which can be significant. And it's certainly if we have assumptions of 8% of market return and we're seeing market returns in the order of 4 and 5 instead, that increases the liability to the taxpayer, and it becomes an unknown liability because actuarially we say this is how long a retiree will live and this is what the benefit we will have to pay actuarially, and that's how the numbers are arrived at. But if we have a healthy retiree base and they live longer, it's an unknown liability to the taxpayer that should not be. Thank you.